want to say hi and happy Friday and happy holidays to everybody, because this is probably my only chance to say that. And I wanted to welcome you to the FPQC webinar. Couple of housekeeping details I wanted to go over with you. Again, just people can jump on. We've waited a couple of minutes, but we'd also ask that when you come on, if you would make sure your camera is off so we can save bandwidth for our webinar. Also, before we get started, I'm going to do a little brief commercial. Stephanie, can we switch to the next slide? So we want to ask you to consider joining our NICU newest quality project, which we call the PARED Initiative. And PARED is really a family-centered care initiative. So the next slide, Stephanie. What we're doing is we're focusing on the 4 domains of family-centered care, and that's where the PARED acronym actually came from. We're so blessed. We have an advisory group of parent professionals, healthcare professionals, and also NICU parents who came together to help us put this initiative together. The other issue that they came up with is they want to focus this initiative on skin-to-skin care. And that was chosen because, number one, it's truly evidence-based. There's probably some of the best evidence in terms of family-centered care with skin-to-skin in the world. And I'm not just talking the country, I'm talking the world with skin-to-skin care. And also, it's easily measured. So that's what we're doing our centerpiece on. And then we just like to invite you all to join. The next slide has where you can go for more information, our application. We actually have a recruitment webinar up there, and you can just go to our website or email us with more questions. And now with that, I have the great privilege to introduce our speaker. I really want to talk to us all for the last 2 years, for all of us in NICU, be we healthcare providers, be we family, be we babies, whoever. This last 2 years have been nothing short of traumatic. In fact, this morning, I heard an incredible descriptor of the last 2 years, which they called it a dumpster fire on LinkedIn. I thought that was so apropos. So where do we go from here? Well, today's speaker, Mary Coughlin, is here to help. Mary is an inspirational speaker, motivational coach, and transformational consultant. She's a veteran of the Air Force Nurse Corps, and her clinical background is over 35 years. And during that time, she's worked as a staff nurse, a charge nurse, a neonatal nurse practitioner, a healthcare administrator, and she's also an entrepreneur. She's currently the president and founder of Caring Essentials Collaborative, LLC. Mary is a global leader in neonatal nursing, and she has published extensively on the topic of trauma-informed care for infants, families, and clinicians. Her scholarly works include textbooks, books chapters, and peer-reviewed papers. Most recently, Mary and her interdisciplinary faculty have created an assessment-based certificate program endorsed by the NIDCAP Foundation, the National Association of Neonatal Nurses, and the Council of International Neonatal Nurses, in accordance with standards established by the Institute for Credentialing Forces, so that if you folks are a magnet, you know what that means, to distinguish individuals as trauma-informed professionals. Most importantly, Mary's work has, she's saying more than 20,000 clinicians. I've known Mary for many years. I want to say that number is way higher than 20,000 from as many as 20 different countries. I'm going to say worldwide. So without further ado, I'm turning the webinar over to Mary.
Thank you so very much, Sue. And before I get started, I just want to thank Sue, Linda, and the Florida Perinatal Quality Collaborative for this opportunity to share a topic that I'm insanely passionate about. And so let me just get myself together here and pull up my slides. Give me one sec. All right, here we go. Okay, so where do we go from here? And this is really all about adopting a trauma-informed paradigm in the NICU, but even beyond. When I first started on this journey, it was back in 2013, so 8 years ago. I had a very interesting clinical experience where I was stepping in as the interim nurse manager on an inpatient adolescent psych unit. And I have no psych background, just FYI, okay? But they felt, oh, you've got pediatric experience, you'll be fine. I'm like, no, I'm a NICU nurse. But I stepped into the position and I had amazing mentors, 2 brilliant clinical nurse specialists in psych, and actually this really brilliant psych nurse from the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health. And they were talking to me about wanting to adopt this paradigm of trauma-informed care. I had never heard of it before. And so, of course, started digging into it and discovered that this paradigm actually has its roots in behavioral health. It has probably now close to 50-year history in the world of behavioral and mental health as a paradigm that guides clinicians in how they engage with their patients. And I really wanted to understand how I could best support my team at the time. But as I started diving into the literature, it just hit me that, holy moly, this belongs in the NICU. And I started really just, going berserk, blogging. Sue probably remembers this time in my life, writing just like a mad person to get this out because it just seemed so relevant. And actually there was one piece of literature that spoke to me directly from a pediatric perspective, and it was written by the Academy of Pediatrics. It was written in 2012, and it talked about the lifelong implications, I think that's the term they use, implications of toxic stress for the developmental trajectory of the infant. So that really opened the door to me in embracing this paradigm and just getting, super, what do you call it when you're shouting from the pulpit, super loud about it. So I hope the information that I share with you resonates with you. I want this to be very interactive. So please feel free to throw your questions into the chat box, and I'll try and navigate it back and forth during my talk, or at the very least after my talk. These are the main points that I want to convey to you this afternoon. Give you a little bit of background about the biological relevance of trauma and trauma-informed care in the NICU, share with you the latest information we have about the physiologic and psychologic morbidities and mortality associated with this experience of trauma/toxic stress in the NICU. And then I want to share with you some really cool information that's literally hot off the press from the American Academy of Pediatrics. It just came out in August, where they published 2 papers now talking about trauma-informed care. One is a clinical report, and the second is actually a policy statement. And I had the amazing privilege to actually chat it up with the author of those papers. And we're now kind of talking about how does this idea of trauma-informed care fit in, with the world of neonatology. Their global statement, the Academy's global statement, is talking about the relevance of it across all child care services. So I'm going to share with you a quick video, and then we'll move on. Okay, I have to hit the button. All right, hold on. Let me know if you can hear it. It's quiet right now, but give me a thumbs up.
The reality is that we all need a certain amount of stress, a certain amount of anxiety to perform well. If we don't care about that exam that we're gonna have tomorrow, we'll probably fail. If we're gonna cross the street and a truck is coming at us, we have release of adrenaline. We have release of a hormone that we call cortisol. We want to jump out of there, and adrenaline and cortisol are going to help us do that. So there's that good amount of stress. But if all day long you're feeling like the truck is coming at you, day after day after day, that's going to take a toll on the body. And the amygdala obviously here has greater activation in the PTSD. We were able to image children that had experienced trauma and compare those brain images with children that didn't have an experience of trauma and didn't have symptoms.
Right, an exaggerated fear response.
An exaggerated fear response with decreased activation in areas that we need to control that emotion, in the frontal areas.
Exposure to early adversity and trauma literally affects the structure and function of children's developing brains. So the kid next to them hits them, or the teacher reprimands them in a way that they're uncomfortable with, right? literally what they're feeling, that activation is like there was a truck coming at them. You can give something that will mask symptoms, right? For example, if someone has a cough, right, you can give them a really strong cough serum that will suppress their cough. But if it's because they have tuberculosis or lung cancer, then what you're doing is merely masking the symptoms while the disease process continues to fester. We know what's happening in children's brains and bodies with the experience of toxic stress. So the question now is, what do we do about it?
So the early work that really, the early work that talks about early childhood adversity and the implications of trauma and toxic stress were really done looking at kind of what was perceived as a healthy population. And then just to asking people to answer these questions. It was called the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire. Answer these different questions. There were 10 of them about their childhood experience. And for every question that they gave an answer of yes, that became their ACE score. And in the original study, they actually studied 17,000 people who participated in this study, and they were from a managed care network out in California. And right off the bat, what they noticed was that 2/3 of the respondents answered at least one on the questionnaire. So right off the bat, they discovered, gee whiz, it seems like early childhood adversity is fairly pervasive. That has been validated in subsequent studies, and even just recently corroborated by Merrick and his team, who have demonstrated that yes, even today, or actually the paper was published in 2019, that persists, right? So trauma in childhood is pervasive. The other piece of the study also demonstrated a graded dose relationship with the experience of trauma and adult disease, morbidity and mortality. And basically, I think it was, I know it was a score of 4 or more, but the diseases that were impacted, and again, it was from a managed care network, so they were able to correlate the ACE scores with their medical history, with their medical situation. So it was something like a 390% increased risk of developing chronic pulmonary lung disease with a score of 4 or more. Hepatitis was like 240%. Depression was on there, and it was a big number. Suicide risk, it was an increase by 1,200%. And the risk of becoming an IV drug user was a 5,000% increased risk with an adverse childhood experience score of 4 or more. So that's fascinating, right? I mean, that's really good information, and that can really help us open our eyes and open our hearts to understanding that most of the folks that you're bumping into on a day-to-day basis have a trauma history. But what I was really interested in is that, of course, but then diving even deeper. And does the experience of a life-threatening illness during, shortly after birth also add to your vulnerability to adult disease, morbidity, and mortality? And in fact, yes, it absolutely does. This is a hot off the press paper that was really wicked cool, and it was looking at the developmental programming and mechanisms of resilience and vulnerability in individuals born preterm. And so what they discovered is, you can kind of see, I mean, this is just for visual effect, but all of these different colored bars that you see underneath the gray bar are just all of the different neurobiological systems that are related to stress mechanisms. Okay, so parasympathetic nervous system, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, some subcortical structures, and the like. And what they've been able to deduce from their understanding of the experience of intensive care for premature people is that postnatal stress actually alters the programming of the brain. And it includes these key systems that become markers for affective disorders and social psychopathologies. So in that video, you saw that little girl that was like feeling like there was a Mack truck coming at her all the time. What happens to these premature people, or anybody really, any newborn that experiences intensive care, is their experience. That's how brains develop, right? Their experience informs how the brain is going to adapt to the situation. Neurons that fire together wire together. And so when the experience is repeatedly frightening, stressful, terrifying, painful, all of those negative things, then the brain gets wired for that. And the body responds accordingly to promote the survival of the organism. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but surviving your life isn't really what life is all about. But that's, kind of a little bit of the backstory of what's happening to these individuals from that biologic perspective. This guy, Agarostos, he did a paper in 2018 as well that kind of set the stage for us understanding the implications and the developmental impact of early life stress. And then they put this paper together, which I think is wicked cool. And I hope you can get some sense of it. And I'm just going to move you through the graphic representation here. So in addition to the results that they had in that ACE study that I shared with you initially, what they've also been able to identify is that there's a transgenerational phenomenon associated with this stress. So these toxic stress situations, these traumatic situations, actually change the epigenome of these individuals that survive the trauma. And the rationale behind that is so that the next generation will be able to also tolerate that stress. I mean, that's just kind of like the cellular ideas about this, but it plays out in individuals' levels of vulnerability and levels of resilience in dealing with different traumatic situations. So on that top yellow bar there, that's what the authors are describing as the first hit, okay? The first hit is your genetic or epigenetic susceptibility to either stress intolerance or pain intolerance, all these different kinds of things. And then there's another factor of the fetal programming. Really great research now that's helping us understand what the fetus experience is in utero is like when the mother is having a stressful life. And they looked at stuff like mothers that endure domestic violence, mothers that also have a history of trauma in their own childhood, and how this really sets the stage for not just the attachment to their developing individual, the developing baby, but also the biology of that developing individual themselves. So you've got that kind of as a backdrop, and then stress happens, right? So then this person who's got this predisposition for stress sensitivity, if you will, and then they get admitted into the NICU. And so there's all of these other different factors then that come into play. The timing, right? The more immature you are, the more pervasive the negative consequences will be. But that doesn't mean that if you're full term, you're going to skate through this. There will be repercussions of the trauma experience for that individual as well, because again, remembering how our brains develop, they're developing all the way up through adolescence. So every experience of trauma or toxic stress is another, hit to the system that's then going to try and struggle and grapple with adaptation. And as I say that word adaptation, there's a reminder here to just share with you guys that when individuals and ourselves as well, right, when we adapt to stressful situations, over time, that adaptation can actually become maladaptive. And one example comes to mind is, you think about the baby who's programmed that all touch is painful. So they withdraw anytime that there's a touch experience. Well, that might serve them, air quotes here, serve them in the short term. But then once they get out, they're discharged from the hospital, they're engaging with other people and family members and the like, and people want to hug them or touch them, and they recoil, there's psychosocial ramifications of that now maladaptive response. Okay, so and I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys. As I said, I'm really passionate about this, and I just feel like I need to share everything I have in my head with you guys. So as I move you down this graphic here, then the blue section is really talking about all of the systems that come into play during that experience of trauma and toxic stress. Allostatic processes, and allostasis is a fancy word for stress. It's the opposite of homeostasis, right? So homeostasis is the engine's running and humming and everything's good and you're chill. Allostasis is boom, a stressor comes into the situation. The body tries to figure out, okay, what are we doing? Are we threatened? And we adapt, right? And that's in an ideal situation. So for example, for me, speaking to you guys, I was a little bit stressed, there's a new group of people here. I'm sharing something that I'm really passionate about. I want you to love me. I want you to like this. So I get a little bit stressed, but it's not a bad stress, I hope. No, it's not. It's not a bad stress. It's a good stress that gets me energized, gets me enthused. I've adapted to my stressor, and I'm now at this new plateau of homeostasis. But if the stress was just so overwhelming, like I started talking and everybody just like left the room, it wouldn't kill me, but it would be, a heightened experience of stress. So, and a lot of biological processes would be activated in response to that. So, of course, there's the standard ones, right? Your stress response, your neuroendocrine responsiveness here. But the neuroendocrine response is intimately linked with your immune system. And you'll hear about, not in my talk, but you might hear about this in other lectures on this subject, about the neuroendocrine immune network, NEI. That when you have a stress response, it's not just cortisol that gets squirted out into the system, it's cytokines and other inflammatory mediators. And so one of the theories around the link between early life stress and adult morbidity and mortality is that it's because of this low-grade inflammation that actually gets set up as a consequence of your stress. So, just to really kind of understand all of those elements, of course, brain development is definitely impacted across all of these different levels, right? Neurogenesis, synaptic plasticity, synaptogenesis, neurotransmitter signaling, just a lot of different things get impacted, as well as your vascularity, your vascular tone is also impacted, epigenetic programming, and I'm going to touch upon that in a few slides. Great research coming out of Northern Italy. Sleep and circadian rhythmicity is off, and sleep, if you don't get enough sleep, that does significant damage on your body and your biology. Your metabolism gets all screwed up, and you actually have an increased risk of free oxygen radicals and that redox state phenomenon. And so that's in the acute stage. And then depending on your level of vulnerability and your level of exposure, it's going to, kind of impact your developmental trajectory. When I mentioned that paper at the beginning of my slide presentation that was published in 2012 by the Academy, they actually had collected all of this research and informed by multiple disciplines, and then restructured the basic science of pediatrics based off of this understanding that it's the ecology of the developing individual, right? The physical environment and the social environment that impacts the biology. So it's an eco-bio developmental framework. The ecology impacts the biology, and then that biology, which is adaptations that may become maladaptive, informs the developmental trajectory of that individual. And that's really what's happening here. So whatever happens in your early life actually sets the stage then for how you will deal with subsequent stressors. And of course, thinking about what Sue said at the beginning of this talk, certainly the past 2 years have really given us a taste of what trauma can be like, and the varying degrees in which this experience has touched all of our lives, in different levels of intensity and the like. So it's just really important to kind of understand this from a global perspective. No one is, if you got a pulse, you're vulnerable to this experience. And then, of course, I talked about that transgenerational phenomenon. So that's a big piece of that. So to try and kind of like boil this down into something that for me feels really kind of comprehensive, what we understand about brain development is that the brain develops from the bottom up. And now there's a really good reason that the brain develops from the bottom up. It's because the bottom part of our central nervous system is tasked with keeping us alive. It's tasked with survival. So at that brainstem level, at that bottom core of the brain is trying to figure out through this process called neuroception. This is a term that was coined by this super genius guy, Dr. Stephen Porges. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he's the author of the polyvagal theory, which is fascinating information if you really want to nerd out on this topic. But it really begins with that neuroception, which is an unconscious process of always surveying the perimeter to determine, am I safe or am I in threat? Am I safe or am I in threat? And you've probably experienced this on a relatively maybe close to conscious level, when maybe you're working night shift and you're walking to the parking garage and it's really dark, and the hairs on the back of your neck start to walk up because you're heightened. You could possibly be in a dangerous situation. That's neuroception. So your brain is trying to figure out, am I safe? Once your brain says, okay, it doesn't look like you're going to get killed in the next 3 seconds, the next thing that your central nervous system is trying to figure out, because of our species, am I loved? Is there connection? Does somebody give a hoot about me? It's that evolution. And if I'm safe from threat and I feel connected in the world, then I can open up my neocortex to learn, to pursue education and do all that kind of like other cool stuff that we do as humans. But I can't really fully realize that if I don't feel safe and if I don't feel loved. So what does this look like in the NICU? And this is a wicked cool example for me, I think. I think about feeding a baby. So in the old days, I was one of those people that could feed a rock. And if anybody has not heard of that expression, that's a good thing. But in those days, it was really about emptying the volume feeder into the head of the baby. Whether they were asleep or not really didn't factor in, because it was time for their do-up, right? 8-11-2-5, it's time for you to get a feeding, and I'm going to empty this bottle into your sleeping head or whatever, because I know if we do this, you can go home on the weekend or something like that. So I'm doing this, and if I'm not paying attention, which I wasn't at the time, because I didn't understand any of this. No one did. I'm emptying the bottle. What's really happening for that individual is a terrifying experience. The baby, you may notice that the baby starts leaking milk out the sides of their mouths. Maybe their eyebrows start trying to go up to the top of their hairline. They may be getting a little perioral cyanosis. You might start to see them lose some tone. What's happening is they don't feel safe. Physiologically, they don't feel safe. They're not able to handle the bolus, and the person that is doing this to them isn't paying attention to their cues, isn't connected with them at that social human level. And so it's very, very threatening. And when this experience is repeated over time, right? Neurons are fired together, wire together. What this person learns is that anything that goes in your mouth is dangerous and it could kill you. And then these children go on, right? Once they become volitional eaters, they're like, yeah, no way, I'm out of that. And then you end up having to do the G-tube thing and all of this other type of situation. Now I'm simplifying a very complex situation, but that's in essence what's happening. And so it's what we're being invited to do is really step up and understand that biology, because understanding that then can inform how I am going to engage with you in a way that's going to make you feel safe, make you feel seen, and support your goals, your trajectory, not my agenda. And we'll get a little bit into that later, okay? The cost of traumatic stress, really, really great research now coming out across a lot of different fronts. The image on the left, which I know is really small, but just bear with me, it's a tip off for me to share this really cool information with you. We talk about the cost of traumatic stress from an energy perspective, from a caloric perspective. We know that these critically ill individuals, premature, late term, term, whatever, these critically ill individuals require a lot of energy to heal, to grow, to do all the things that they need to do to be healthy and safe. But there's a lot of confounders that can really snatch some of that energy away from them. And stress, toxic stress or traumatic stress is one of those things. Having frequent A's and B's, is making frequent withdrawals on your caloric reserves, if you will. Whatever healing needs to go on, whatever growth needs to go on, experiences of pain and stress, those tap the system hugely. There was actually one paper that even looked at a connection between the use of sucrose and reductions in ATP availability. And if you remember that, it's adenosine triphosphate. So it's a really important piece of our energy substrate. Other papers really start talking about how this overwhelming traumatic stress experience actually can derange the functionality of mitochondria to the point where you can actually have mitochondrial failure. And I'm not talking about a genetic problem. I'm talking about something that's literally iatrogenic, when we are not paying attention to their energy, the energy consumption. So it's very complex. Adding calories and all that kind of stuff is a great strategy, but the other piece of the puzzle is what is the energy being expended on, and mitigating that as much as we can. Other additional costs associated with traumatic stress pivot around the work of this really brilliant research team out of Northern Italy, Provenzi, Monterosso, Fumagalli, just brilliant researchers that made the discovery around the experience of toxic stress actually causing DNA methylation in these individuals. One of the affected areas was this serotonin transporter gene that was affected by exposure to repeated pain and stress, which kind of gets bundled into this toxic traumatic stress experience. And then they went and followed these individuals and uncovered that the more exposure they had to toxic stress actually decreased their telomere length, density. So telomeres, and you can see on the image here, those are the little caps on the chromosome. Think of them as that plastic tip on your shoelace. And so whenever you have like a life-threatening situation, an injury, you get older, your chromosomes are just drawing on the DNA packed dense material that's in those telomeres, and they're just making those withdrawals to keep you living. But when you have an extreme amount of stress very early in life, your telomeres are also already shortened, and this really helps them understand why survivors of prematurity actually have a shortened lifespan overall. In general, people that have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences can look forward to having a shortened lifespan by almost 20 years. So again, just kind of thinking about all of the global ramifications of these toxic traumatic stressful experiences is really, really important. And it was Monterossi and Provenzi that really, in a really cool paper, they talked about, it was actually, they used this term epigenetics, talking about the epigenetics and the ethical implications now of understanding how these experiences of toxic traumatic stress was actually changing them at that epigenomic level. Don't we have a responsibility then to act on that? I mean, if in fact we're called to first do no harm, then we really need to step up our game and figure out how can we reduce this. I mean, there's a lot of isness in being critically ill in a life-threatening situation, but there are still a lot of things that we can do to mitigate some of those extraneous complications that are leading to significant derangements in the developmental trajectory, health, and wellness, and that sort of thing. So and here's the Fumagalli paper, and this is when they were talking about that that methylation of that serotonin transporter gene, and they followed these kids out to 12 months of age. And in addition to the methylation, they also found smaller brain volumes and compromised developmental outcomes on their that GMDS personal social scale. So they're making the connections, right? Because before we were kind of like looking at these NICU survivors or these survivors of prematurity and going, well, they seem to have, behavioral problems and ADHD and all these other kinds of things. But now we're taking that, we're going back, we're looking at deeper at what's actually happening to these individuals and being able to make more thoughtful assessments of where could we then intervene and possibly mitigate this, these long-term consequences. Okay, so I'm watching my time too, you guys. And so, I wanted to kind of summarize this section of the talk. These are the kind of the collated findings that were published in the Academy's clinical report, looking at the physiologic effects of trauma in children. Now, these were not just premature people, these were children in general, but these do include findings that are associated with NICU hospitalization, PICU, and CICU hospitalization as well. So the parts, of the body that have been impacted: brain, epigenetics, and immune function. The impact, the specifics, and that video kind of talked a little bit about the amygdala, which has been repeatedly exposed, as a culprit in this stress intolerance phenomenon and all the behavioral sequelae associated with that, and then some of the associations with this. And I do have a pretty extensive bibliography, and I'm happy to share these slides with you guys if you want. No pressure, you don't have to have them. So now this next stage, I want to just kind of give you a high view of what are some of the physiologic and psychological morbidities and mortality that have now been reported. Now I'm talking specifically about former premature people. And so Crump, that's the grid here on the left, and I apologize that it's small, but again, just the takeaway is that what we now know is that these individuals are at very high risk for a lot of this adult morbidity that, as you can see here, you know, I mean, these in and of themselves are linked with significant, you know, I'm so sorry, my screen is going crazy on me right now, so I'm there it is. Okay. As you can see, many of these diseases also have a backdrop of a shortened lifespan and other types of comorbidities associated with it. But this is specific to premature people, higher risk for hypertension, diabetes, lipid disorders, ischemic heart disease, heart failure, and consequently, this is what many of them are dying from. And you can see on the screen on the right, this graph on the right, Risney's and all, and they did an amazing cohort study. They looked at over 6 million children, all right, from 4 different Nordic birth cohorts, all with varying degrees of prematurity, which they've demarcated here on the grid, looking at the association of prematurity with these diseases and subsequent mortality. And so excess mortality associated with shortened gestation was pronounced, and the leading cause of death, excluding non-communicable diseases, was associated with cardiovascular disease, chronic lung, diabetes, and the like. But what this report really called attention to is that the number one, or the most common cause of death in these survivors of prematurity was defined as external causes. And external causes are comprised of accidents and suicides. So that's the leading cause of premature death in these individuals with a birth history of prematurity. And that right then and there, and I'll share a little more data about the psychopathological risk of these individuals in another slide. But I did want to share this because this guy, Lewandowski, I've been following his work for a little while, and he's really been tooting the horn for a while about the cardiovascular vulnerability of these former preterm people. And now he's really kind of digging in a little bit more to give us some more background and biology of what's underlying. And again, one of the key influencers for the pathogenesis of these cardiovascular disruptions in development is related to exposure to those neurochemicals associated with a toxic stress response. So I want you to plant that in your head to realize that gee whiz, Mary, are you trying to say that maybe we should look at how we're managing the stress and the pain? Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. The psychosocial challenges, these authors here, particularly Sardi, has done lots of research looking at the socio-emotional and psychopathological outcomes of former premature people. And this was just interesting information that I wanted to just kind of, share with you about the MRI findings and the relationship of these findings of subcortical structures specifically that are demonstrating injury as a consequence of prematurity, that are also linked to the evolution of psychopathology. And some of the other biological and environmental factors, and if you remember when I talked about the ecology of the developing individual, it's that physical environment, but it's also the social environment. And there's a change in the parent relationship with the child. And probably many of you guys are familiar with the concept of the vulnerable child syndrome. And there's gradations of that experience that many premature people experience in their relationship and their attachment with their parents. This, again, a very recent paper. Dieter Wolke is world renowned for his work looking at outcomes of premature people. And I know this is a really busy slide, as a lot of them are, I'm starting to discover now. But he was really just highlighting all of the different domains of vulnerability as a consequence of prematurity that negatively impacts their quality of life, not just health-related quality of life, but general quality of life. Like, these individuals are less likely, survivors of prematurity, survivors of NICU experiences are less likely to have committed relationships. They're less likely to have children. They're less likely, we know, they struggle with academic performance. They're less likely to have not just romantic relationships, but general, friend relationships and stuff. So it's just important for us to understand the global implications of this traumatic stress that it, certainly it derides the individual's physiologic integrity, but there's so much more to these individuals. And Vanis and all, and Nosardi was also another author on this paper, really did this wicked cool, I think, graphic to help us really look at the vulnerability of these individuals to develop psychiatric disorders. And when I say psychiatric disorders, I mean, these guys are kind of globalizing it as psychosis, but in other pieces of the literature, we know that these premature people are at increased risk for significant anxiety, depression, suicide, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. So it's really important, that we understand that. And that, to me at least, gives me a different lens to look when I come back and I'm at the bedside and seeing this poor little soul who's isolated, alone. We think they're asleep, but are they really, when you start digging into the polyvagal theory, are they asleep, or have they dissociated from the experience because it's so traumatic and so overwhelming to them? And I would love to share more of this information with you guys if you're ever up to, doing a one-on-one. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. But what I want to kind of leave you with before I transition into the last part of my talk is the power of social connection, the power of those social experiences, whether it's, the gold standard, right, for baby is parent, right? The number one trauma of a neonate across all mammalian species, and that includes us, is maternal separation. And we need to get it into our head. There's lots of people beating the drum, but we need to get it into our head that maternal separation is life-threatening to that individual. This entire COVID experience has just heightened our awareness, and we have added insult to injury by what we have adopted in the sake of, I don't know how to express my feelings about this, but you're probably getting a sense of it. It was wrong. It's bad to separate these individuals from their loved ones. We pose more of a threat to these babies than their parents do. And so we need to really understand the full breadth of the biological connectivity, the biological relevance of that relationship to preserve and protect the integrity, not just of the developing individual's physiology and psychology, but the parents as well. And this was a really cool study that just kind of looked at that, in the experience of homeostasis with social experiencing. This top graph is like, yes, I've got my loved one here and I'm feeling chill. And even when bad things happen, I feel safe and secure because I can get through this difficult stuff with you. When that's taken away, there is no more homeostasis, right? If I don't have a social network, if I don't have social supports, it deranges my physiology and my biology, which then impacts my psychology, which then impacts my biology even more. So it's really about understanding the importance of this connection, that the individuals that we're serving are more than just a bunch of systems that have gone awry, that we really need to look at this differently. And the Academy is really guiding us towards that. But I do have something to say about that as well. Okay, so this is from the Duffy paper, which was the policy statement. You guys have to check it out. It's open access. You can get it off the bib. These are the elements of a trauma-informed system. So I've laid the foundation and hopefully set up a sense of urgency to do things differently. You need to have safe physical and emotional environments. You need to have leadership that's committed to trauma-informed care. You need to empower the patient and the family. And we can empower the babies that we're taking care of by reading their cues, by using them to guide, using their behavioral responses to guide how we will continue or discontinue our engagement with them. But to make sure that the TIC, the trauma-informed care, is continuous through the healthcare system. It's not just only when Sue's on shift, or it's not just in the NICU. It has to be throughout the entire system. So this is big work. And that's what the Academy is hitting upon, these big things that need desperately to be transformed. You need to recruit and train a workforce that is trauma-informed and compassionate. And I'm putting big weight on compassionate, because compassionate is the cornerstone of being trauma-informed. And you need to coordinate the care across all family serving systems so that these families that are in the throes of crisis, that are having a mental breakdown because of the crisis that they're facing, that you just don't sweep it under the rug or refer to the social worker, that there's a system in place that you can actually call, maybe a psychologist who's on call for emergency situations, or there's some kind of like a code, whatever, pick a color, that can be activated to come and support these individuals, these families in crisis authentically. Because what happens when we don't use the language of trauma, these individuals bury their feelings, and they then go on to develop acute stress disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and all of the associated complications that go along with that unprocessed, unmetabolized trauma, because we're failing to use the right language and recognize what it is that we're seeing. I had a cool opportunity we did a focus group down at UConn, and talked to different groups of different multidisciplinary focus groups about the idea and the language of trauma and stuff. And many people were put off. They didn't like it. Are you trying to tell me that I'm traumatizing my patients? Like, well, once you hear this, and you don't do anything differently, yeah. But, what can we do about it? And the biggest thing that clinicians felt bad about was we didn't want to scare the families. You can't scare them. They're already traumatized. They just don't have the language to call it that. And so we need to help them use that language. And by us using the language, it better informs us to explore what are the resources that I can bring in then to really help these individuals in crisis. And so in the policy paper, they had several areas for recommendations, and I picked the one that was talking about like at system level, for hospitals and stuff like that. And it talks about, again, committing and becoming a TIC system and integrating these practices into services, recruiting and training people, expanding and improving strategies for identification. I'm going to touch upon that just for a quick second, because I think I know there's a big movement. When I got to talk with Dr. Forkey, who was the author of the clinical report and the colleague of Duffy here from this paper, she was sharing with me the concern about a movement out in California to start, as an intake, questioning people, about their trauma histories and stuff. And I cautioned that, and she felt good about that too, which was really cool, because it can be re-traumatizing. Instead of assessing individuals, can't we just assume everybody has trauma in their lives? We know this from the studies that have already been put forth. So just thinking about that, like in doing this work, it needs a different mindset. We need to build seamless referral networks. That's kind of, I mentioned before about like a code response and stuff like that. Develop care models and fair payment mechanisms to promote this implementation. Promote system-wide QI, and this is all in your court, guys, that the quality improvement work that can be done around the adoption and implementation of trauma-informed processes and practices, supporting engagement across all different team members, all different disciplines, and then of course develop and implement and evaluate the policies to reduce re-traumatization. So it's really about walking the talk. But as I kind of alluded to, all right, this whole idea of being trauma informed, it's not like, oh God, we've got to do this now. We got to add this to all of the things that we're doing now. It's not that kind of a thing, but some areas are approaching it that way. Being trauma informed isn't something that you flip on and flip off. And so I loved this quote. It felt very appropriate for what we're doing today. Is we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. We've developed a healthcare system that really focuses on the pathology of the individual. There's this paradigm that they use. It's about what's wrong with you, right? The standard biomedical approach to healthcare is what's wrong with you. That's how we frame how we engage with you. What's wrong with you? And we, call the people to come in and fix whatever's wrong with you. But to be trauma informed, it shifts the question, and it shifts the question to what happened to you. And trust me, when you ask the question, what happened to you, you'll get what's wrong and so much more. And that may feel overwhelming when I first say that out loud, but actually it's what you need to help the whole person. Because again, at the end of the day, isn't that what we're really trying to do? I mean, if you want to just be an auto mechanic, I mean, there are other areas that you can work than medicine when you're caring for these whole humans, these souls that are suffering across so many different domains as a consequence of one medical issue. It's impacting everything around them. And you guys have had this, right? From just COVID, not even being in the hospital, how one thing can just disrupt every single aspect of your life. So we have to think differently about how we're going to adopt and integrate a trauma-informed paradigm into healthcare. My mission is to transform the heart and soul of healthcare around the world. And I think we do that by becoming trauma-informed, by becoming trauma-informed professionals, and with emphasis on the word becoming. I love the word becoming because it's aspirational. It suggests that there's no destination. You're always evolving and unfolding and moving closer and closer to that higher expression of who you are called to be in this life, right? I mean, I didn't always realize this. Like, I've been working on this for 8 years, and I thought there's going to be a point where I'm going to know what it is I'm supposed to do and I'll be all set. But nope, it's still unfolding, and I'm still seeing more and more opportunities, more and more insights of this paradigm to help connect people with their purpose and their passion, their why in service to others. But yes, we do need like foundations. We need a framework for this. And actually, I see my name on the bottom of this slide. I didn't write these principles. These principles are actually from the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, here in the United States. And there's some flexibility in how these principles and values are represented. You'll see sometimes additional principles representing gender, sexual orientation, and that sort of thing, and absolutely the right thing to do. To me, I feel like it's all integrated, and that these are the 5 core principles and values of a trauma-informed approach, that we're here to ensure safety, psychological safety, physical safety, emotional safety, spiritual safety. We're here to offer choice across babies, families, and our colleagues, right? And that was the other piece of this work. I focused all about the baby with a bit of a nod to the parents. And then it was like, wait a minute, this is all of us. This is the baby. This is the family. This is us. And so all of these have relevance for all of us, right? It's the level of which we can collaborate authentically and create those experiences of empowerment that help us be worthy of trust, right? Be trustworthy to each other, to the families, and of course to our patients. And then for our framework that we've developed here with my team, we then integrate that with these core measures. The core measures for developmental care, now the core measures for trauma-informed care, are these 5 general categories that represent disease-independent caring practices, caring experiences that we create, that we need to ensure are safe, offer choice, provide collaboration, empowerment, and trustworthiness. It's about the environment, physical, human, organizational, protecting sleep, preventing, minimizing, and assessing pain and stress, ADLs, posture and play, eating and nourishment, skincare and hygiene. And then this last one, which I just now see my E popped off the line, but compassionate collaborative relationships. It used to be the family-centered care core measure. But again, in the work and the evolution of my own journey with this, I realized that family has to be integrated through all of these core measures, or I'm just perpetuating the silo model that is currently in existence. Families aren't just this other entity that we have to take care of. And we say this, but we don't live and breathe it. They are partners. They need to be integrated. We need to cultivate these compassionate collaborative relationships with all of those individuals that we interact with personally and professionally. It's the patient, it's the family, and it's our colleagues as well. But the thing about this stuff, right? You see this little person here. I'm not trying to give you more things to do, because trust me, and I hope you're on point with me on this. We do enough to these people. We do so much stuff to these individuals. And for me, being trauma-informed isn't about doing more to these individuals, but it's really about how we do the things that we do. And that is framed and guided by this outer circle that you see. And these are the attributes of a trauma-informed professional. These attributes were identified. I got to work with a really cool group back in 2018. International, did I say this? International interdisciplinary neonatal experts. And we were talking about coming up with a certification for trauma-informed care. And we went back and forth, and we decided we would do an assessment-based certificate program, because we didn't want the certification to just hinge on just being the smartest person in the room. Although we love smart people, smart is really, really great. But just because you're wicked smart doesn't mean you're going to do anything differently, right? So we really wanted people to be knowledgeable, but all ways of knowing, not just empirical knowledge, but personal, intuitive, experimental, ethical, aesthetic, metaphysical, all ways of knowing, and then all ways of healing. You know, having healing intention is about loving kindness, forgiveness, valuing humanity, your spirituality, all of these ways of cultivating a healing intention, but also knowing, as I mentioned earlier, this idea of trauma-informed care is also for the clinician. So it's practicing personal wholeness. It's, it's exercise, it's being in nature, it's meditating, it's nutrition, it's, I'm looking at all the things in my head, I'm not catching them all, but it's all of those aspects, because you cannot give what you do not have. So you might be showing up for work and you're the warm body because your cup is so empty. And what that patient's going to get, it's going to be a warm body experience, right? It's not going to be somebody who's fully present, fully engaged, fully committed to easing the suffering of this other person, because you just don't have it. You don't have it in you. And so that's, this work of being trauma informed really does begin with you filling up your cup and nurturing yourself, because it takes courage to do this work. Because what I'm asking folks to do as they go down this path, I mean, you can go either way, right? You can just think of it as one more thing to do and just go, be off with it. Or you can say, you know what, we need to flip the switch. I need to stand up and step out of line. The status quo is not serving the patients, the families, and it's not serving my calling. So I'm going to step up and stand out and take courageous action. And I'm going to be that informed and educated advocate for my patient and my family. For the patients and the families. I'm going to be that intentional role model and mentor. Being scholarly is not, research is cool, but being scholarly is sharing knowledge, whether it's sharing information with a family, with their colleague. That's what scholarly is. And all of these kind of come together to begin to develop you as a leader for change. That's what all of these elements do. And that's what the intention of this is all about, is about cultivating a whole human who feels solid and grounded in, it's how I show up that makes a difference. It's that therapeutic value of you, if you've heard that expression before. You don't need to put any more stuff in your pocket or put any more things on the list. It's about how you show up. Imperfect, authentic, compassionate, and loving. And that is what it is to be trauma informed. The certificate program now, I'm very happy to share with you guys, and Sue mentioned this at the beginning. In addition to NIDCAP, NAN, and COIN, we've now just been recently endorsed by the National Association of Perinatal Social Workers, which is just absolutely amazing that this idea is resonating with so many different people. I think, I love this quote from Helen Keller, and I am watching my time, that, sometimes you can just feel like I can't make a big difference because I'm just one person. But she says, even though you're just one person, please do not refuse to do something that you can do, because you do make a difference. You change that experience of care. I mean, we do all of these things, right? All of the standard practices that we do in the NICU are all these different colors of the ribbon, right? But how you show up to do it is unique. And it doesn't mean that you're going to compromise on anything. I mean, just, you see, I kind of what I did here. You fade it out. We all leave an impression. I used to do, when I got to do live talks, I used to pass out Play-Doh to everybody, the little tubs, and ask everybody to play with the Play-Doh. And then at the end of my talk, I would say, okay, now put all the Play-Doh back in the tub the exact same way as when you first took it out. And people would try, God bless them, right? And then I'd say, ask them, is it the same? And there's always a smarty pants who says yes, but no, it's never the same. The minute you touch that Play-Doh, even if you just opened the can, touched it because I asked you to, and you put the lid back, it's transformed. It's got your heat, your pressure, your imprint on it, maybe some crumbs from your breakfast or your lunch or something. It's changed forever. And that's what happens when we engage with others. We leave an impression that we can never take back. And so I think, by taking this step towards becoming trauma informed, it's an invitation to leave the best impression possible, and always be open to learning new and more compassionate ways of engaging with another human being, particularly one who's suffering, so that you can help them move through their crisis more successfully, and not just survive their hospital experience, but thrive and flourish. And that's all I got. So I'm gonna come up here and see how I, Okay, here it is. Sorry. Okay, stop share. I'm looking down at the chat box. Oh, look at you guys. You guys are rock stars. Our healthcare is reactionary versus preventive. Thank you, Meredith, for saying that, because that's the other piece about, for me at least, this paradigm within the world of pediatrics and neonatology. It does become a prevention-oriented strategy, versus in behavioral health, it's more of a reactive, right? I know you've got trauma, so I'm going to walk this way towards you instead of coming full frontal and make you feel threatened. So thank you, Meredith. It's a preventative strategy. And we do need some QI work. We do need some research around this to really make a difference. Is there a book on this available? Well, G. Willikers, Vera, actually the second edition of Transformative Nursing in the NICU. This is what the book looks like, okay? And I've compiled a lot of that research that I shared with you. Some of it's 2021, the book came out in 21, so I don't have all of that latest stuff, but I think you might find it helpful. It's from Springer Publishing, and you can get an ebook or a regular book. Other books that are really good for it, let me think about it, and I'll set, because I do have lots of books up here. Actually, there's a book that just came out by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. It's not about the NICU, but it's about what happened to you. The title of the book is What Happened to You, and that you might find really, really helpful. Do you have a recommendation / suggestion on how to start bringing TIC to a NICU? Well, I mean, what we're doing now is we're inviting people to enroll in the program and then get a team. And our approach is really looking at innovation theory. You know, when you have 16% of your staff, you know, invested in an initiative, you're more likely to have success and make that transformation. But my mother-in-law uses this expression all the time: an inch is a cinch, a yard is too hard. I'm sure many of you guys are thinking, oh my gosh, I want to do this, let's do it all now. And that's wicked awesome. But it won't happen because you'll piss off a lot of people. You have to take those baby steps and just begin by educating yourself, really, and understanding how does this sit with you? You know, check out the articles, check out the papers, reach out to me. I mean, gee willikers, I mean, if you haven't figured out now, I'm passionate about this. I'm giving you my email address in the thingamajiggy here. I'm happy to chat with you and answer any additional questions. What is the biggest barrier to implementation of trauma-informed care in the NICU? So Danielle, excellent question. There's probably more than what I'm familiar with, but I think one of the biggest things that I've encountered is people just like, it's just the language, right? And they don't really understand, what are you talking about? Are you trying to tell me that I'm traumatizing the patients? So it's really about that one-on-one engagement to help people understand, I'm not trying to say that. I know that you're working on the information that you have on hand right now, and to recognize that the baby's experience, with or without you, it's traumatic, okay? A life-threatening situation is automatically coming out of the gate trauma. Our goal is to then manage that experience and mitigate any additional trauma as best as we can. So I think that there's a knowledge gap, Danielle, to kind of summarize that, and then just having those one-on-one conversations with folks to help them understand. How do we break down the silos? Brilliant. Family-centered care versus trauma-informed care, and integrate these principles. That's a wicked awesome question too. And again, I think it's starting out by having those discussions, open, honest discussions, you know, kind of like, you know, Brene Brown kind of discussions, you know, where you just say, okay, listen, we're just going to level the playing field here, and let's just talk about what does this mean, so that people, have you ever been in a situation where you have thoughts in your head and it makes perfect sense in your head, but then when the words come out, you're like, oh, that actually sounds different than what I envisioned in my head? It's those kinds of experiences, right? To just kind of like have a, what do you call it? Like a download of people's thoughts about this, and then pick it up, you know, have the conversation continue until you can really start saying, let's test this. Let's see where we're going with this, and make those small steps. And just like the NICU, right? It's a few steps forward and maybe 3 steps back and then 2 steps. It's that, but embrace that. Embrace that part. I'm currently working through, I know, Meredith, I'm pumped, and it's awesome. Thank you. It not only has made me think about how I approach the families and babies, but it has also made me think of how I treat myself. And Meredith, to be honest, that's one of the big things that has hit me from the people that have been in the program is how much it's impacted them at a personal level. And it makes sense now that I think about it, because we think that we have to flip a switch and I have to be this way at the hospital and I have to be this way at home. And what ends up happening is then we're never whole, right? We're never bringing our best self to any situation because we're compartmentalizing. And I think the thing about trauma-informed care, that from the graduates at least, is that I get to be who I am. You know, I feel comfortable with that. And people have been sharing examples of how the principles of this paradigm have relevance for their child rearing, their, connections with their, community and that sort of thing. And I think that's the beautiful discovery that I've made in watching folks go through the program. Taking care of yourself so you can take care of others reminds me of that. They say on play, you got it, Christina. That's exactly it. Because you just can't help another person if you're not taking care of yourselves. But we have all these crazy mental, what do you call them, constructs in our head that, oh, that's selfish. And, you want to be, always giving. But what happens is when you're giving from an empty cup, what you're giving is nothing. And that's not what any of us came here to do this work for, right? That's not our legacy. I gave until I dropped, and then you drop and nobody remembers you, except for there was some chick who used to work here all the time. And we never had to worry about, having a sick call because she'd always fill in. I don't know her name now. Yeah, because that was the mark that you left. But that's not what we're here to do. We're here to do amazing things. And I know every single person on this call, I'll bet dollars to donuts, you've left beautiful impressions on these families and babies that you've served, but it's been a cost to yourself. And so I think if there's one thing that, at least for me, COVID has taught me is I'm worth taking care of. I mean, absolutely, the patients and families are highly valuable, but I can't give them my best if I don't take the time and make the commitment to heal myself and make myself feel whole. And that, there's some fallout from that, but make the investment in yourself. You're absolutely worth it. Go for that walk and, don't go to the meeting or whatever. I mean, you have to balance it out, but, just start really, listening to yourself. Yourself is much wiser than you give yourself credit for. Listen to yourself and find that thing, because that's being trauma informed. It really, really is. You guys are so amazing. I love these questions, and I am so, so grateful that you all stayed on the call. And super grateful to have this opportunity to share this topic with you guys.
Mary, thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about. And what can I say? You always do.
Oh, God bless you. Thank you.
And I just want to reinforce what Mary said, especially with the last 2 years. And really, seriously, if you haven't looked at our website, please look at the website, think about joining the initiative, because that's how we're going to do this transformation for all of us, not just our babies and our families, but for all of us. So please take a look, and thank you again for coming. Happy Friday. Happy holidays. Have a great one, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you again.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Bye, Mary.